For years, fans begged to know what really happened between Edd China and Mike Brewer. The official story never added up, and the rumors only got louder. But the real fracture, the one the cameras never caught, began long before Edd walked away. And once you hear it, you'll never see wheeler dealers the same way again. What actually happened behind the scenes was more complicated, more emotional, and far more revealing than the official version ever explained. And today, that story comes into full view. When Wheeler Dealers launched in 2003, it didn't look like a show destined to become a global automotive phenomenon. No flashy drama, no artificial tension, no manufactured conflict, just two men doing what they love, buying troubled cars and bringing them back to life. Mike Brewer, the charismatic dealmaker, brought the energy and enthusiasm. Edd China, with his calm precision and mechanical genius, brought the heart of the workshop. Their chemistry felt effortless, almost accidental, as if the producers had stumbled upon a perfect formula without realizing it. Viewers weren't just watching repairs, they were learning, connecting, and falling into the rhythm of a garage where every bolt mattered. The early episodes became a blueprint for authenticity. Edd's step-by-step guides turned novices into hobby mechanics. Mike's excitement made every purchase feel like a small adventure. And unlike other car shows, Wheeler Dealers never hid behind edits or shortcuts. It showed the real process, the real costs, the real labor. This honesty built a fiercely loyal audience, especially among fans who were tired of fake builds and staged deadlines. For years, the partnership seemed unbreakable, but as the show expanded across Europe, America, and Asia, success brought something unexpected. Pressure, production schedules tightened, budgets shifted, and the simple magic that defined the show started to collide with the demands of a much larger machine. And that collision would plant the first seeds of the fracture no one saw coming. As Wheeler Dealers exploded in popularity, the reality behind the scenes grew heavier. International success meant more episodes, faster turnarounds, and bigger expectations, but not bigger budgets. What made the show special, ironically, became the most expensive part of producing it: Edd China's meticulous workshop segments. Every repair he explained in detail required hours of filming, proper lighting, safety checks, retakes, and post-production editing. Executives began seeing numbers that made them uneasy. Edd refused to cut corners, insisting that the educational value of the show was non-negotiable. But networks operate on spreadsheets, not sentiment. The longer the repairs took, the more the accountants circled. Soon, quiet conversations turned into direct suggestions. Shorten the explanations, simplify the demonstrations, skip over the harder repairs. For Edd, these weren't minor tweaks. They were structural threats to the soul of the show. Mike, meanwhile, found himself in an impossible position. He saw the mounting tension but had no authority over budget decisions. His job was to find cars, negotiate deals, and keep the show entertaining. He wasn't the one tightening the financial screws, but fans would later assume he was. As deadlines piled up, the strain between creativity and cost became harder to hide. Episodes had to move faster, repairs had to be neater. The show was changing in ways that felt subtle at first, but each change chipped away at the foundation that made Wheeler Dealers authentic. And then came the shift that transformed pressure into full-blown crisis. The moment the show crossed the Atlantic, the move to America was marketed as a bold, new chapter for Wheeler Dealers. In 2014, Discovery pushed the series onto its US automotive network, Velocity, a channel hungry for louder pacing, bigger energy, and a style tailored for American audiences. On paper, the move made sense. Larger market, higher visibility, more cars to choose from. Behind the scenes, though, the shift introduced a new layer of executives who viewed the show not as an educational British classic, but as a product that needed modernization. Velocity's priorities were drastically different. They wanted shorter mechanical segments, punchier storytelling, and a smoother, faster episode structure. The long, detailed repair sequences, the backbone of Edd China's identity, were flagged as too slow and too costly. Meetings became tense. Notes became demand. Edd felt the show was being reshaped into something unrecognizable, something that no longer respected the craft he brought to the workshop. Producers began suggesting outsourcing difficult repairs to off-camera facilities, a move that would save time and money but undermine the authenticity viewers value. To Edd, this wasn't just a bad idea. It was a betrayal of every everything he had built. Mike tried to keep the peace, but even he couldn't soften the pressure coming down from above. The shift to velocity didn't just change the environment, it split the creative vision of the show in two. And as the network continued pushing for a faster, cheaper, more American format, Edd realized he was running out of options and patience. The breaking point was coming, and once it arrived, Wheeler Dealers would never be the same again. The tension between Edd and the production team didn't explode overnight. It built slowly, like pressure in a sealed engine. Every season, under Velocity's oversight, came with new efficiency suggestions. At first, they were framed politely: streamline the workshop segments, reduce step-by-step explanations, speed up filming days. But soon, the tone changed. Meetings grew colder, expectations harsher, and Edd began receiving directives that directly clashed with his values as a mechanic and educator. He was being asked to do less of the very thing that made him essential. The most controversial suggestion was the idea of outsourcing certain repairs to third-party garages, off-camera, and then presenting the finished work as if it had happened inside Edd's workshop. This wasn't just a time saver, it was a rewrite of the show's integrity. Wheeler Dealers had earned its global audience by being transparent. No tricks, no shortcuts. To Edd, outsourcing repairs felt like lying. To the network, it felt like good budgeting. Eventually, Edd found himself spending more time in arguments than under a car. He pushed back, defended the show's identity, and insisted on maintaining the educational depth that had defined the series for over a decade. But instead of compromise, he received a mounting list of creative limitations: fewer repairs, fewer demonstrations, fewer explanations. His purpose was being stripped away piece by piece. The breaking point arrived when Edd realized he was being pushed into a version of the show he could no longer stand behind. Rather than silently accept the changes, he did something producers didn't expect. He chose to walk away entirely. In March 2017, Edd released a detailed YouTube video announcing his departure and explaining in his careful, measured tone exactly why staying would have meant betraying the audience's trust. But the moment that video went live, the story no longer belonged to him, and the consequences would fall heavily on someone else. Edd's departure sent shockwaves through the automotive community, but what no one predicted was the scale of the backlash. Fans didn't just express disappointment, they erupted. Within hours of Edd's announcement, thousands of viewers flooded forums, YouTube comments, and social media with theories, anger, and blame. Many didn't fully understand the network politics behind the scenes, so the easiest villain to point at wasn't Velocity, it was Mike Brewer. To the outside world, Mike was the more outspoken personality, the man closing deals, talking on camera, and acting as the face of the show. When Edd implied creative differences with producers, fans filled in the blanks themselves. They assumed Mike had pushed Edd out, that he'd prioritized the show's continuation over their partnership, or worse, that he had quietly replaced Edd behind the scenes. None of this was true, but the internet thrives on simple narrative, and the simplest was this: Mike stayed, Edd left, therefore Mike must be at fault. The backlash turned vicious. Mike and his family received waves of online harassment, including threats so severe that police became involved. His wife was targeted with hateful messages, his social media filled with accusations calling him a traitor, a sellout, even a bully. Mike later described this period as the darkest of his career, a moment when years of hard work, friendship, and passion were overshadowed by a storm he didn't start. Yet even amidst the attacks, Mike tried to stay composed. He released statements explaining he had fought for Edd to stay, that he had no power over production decisions, and that he was devastated by how the split had been interpreted. But the damage was already spreading. Fans had chosen their hero and their villain, and once the narrative took hold, it was almost impossible to undo. Still, something didn't add up. The story wasn't as clean-cut as the internet believed, and behind closed doors, Mike's side, the one almost no one bothered to hear, was far more complicated and far more emotional than people ever expected. Long before the feud spilled into public view, Mike Brewer felt the shifting atmosphere within the production. He saw the growing tension between Edd and the network, watched arguments escalate, and understood that the show's future was becoming increasingly increasingly fragile. But here's the truth: most fans never realized Mike was not a producer, not an executive, and not the decision-maker pulling creative strings. He was a presenter, one who cared deeply about the show, but had almost no authority over the budget cuts that were driving Edd to frustration. When Edd announced his departure, the revelation blindsided Mike in more ways than one. Not only was he losing his longtime partner and friend, he was also left standing alone in front of the viewers who were desperate for someone to blame. Mike later admitted he felt hurt by how Edd framed the situation. Though Edd never directly attacked him, the wording left enough ambiguity for fans to connect the wrong dots. And once the accusations started, they didn't slow down. Mike insisted he had always admired Edd's integrity and had defended the long workshop segments every time the topic came up. He described Edd as a brother, someone with whom he shared years of long filming days, road trips, inside jokes, and mutual respect. Losing that relationship, then being painted as the villain in its collapse, cut deeply. At one point, Mike revealed he nearly quit the show entirely, emotionally overwhelmed by the torrent of online abuse and feeling as if he couldn't win no matter what he said. But despite everything, the anger, the hurt, the misinterpretations, Mike continued to express only admiration for Edd's talent. He repeatedly emphasized that he never wanted Edd gone and would have happily worked with him for decades more. The tragedy of the split wasn't betrayal, it was miscommunication, corporate pressure, and two men caught in a machine much larger than either of them. Yet even after explaining his side, one question remained: what would happen to Wheeler Dealers now that the partnership that defined it was suddenly over? When Edd China stepped away from Wheeler Dealers, many believed he would disappear from television entirely. But Edd wasn't done, not even close. What he wanted was freedom. Freedom to tinker, to experiment, and to share his engineering passions without network interference. So he turned to YouTube, launching Edd China's Garage Revival, a space where he alone controlled the pacing, the content, and the level of mechanical detail. No budgets to slash explanation, no executives trimming segments, no pressure to compromise. Just Edd, a set of tools, and the kind of deep, hands-on repairs fans adored. But independence came with challenges. Producing high-quality mechanical videos is expensive and time-consuming, even more so without a television crew. Projects stretch longer than expected, uploads slow. Viewers, accustomed to the rapid pace of YouTube, didn't always understand the complexity behind each build. Still, the audience that followed him remained fiercely loyal. People didn't watch Edd for speed, they watched him for authenticity. Behind the scenes, Edd explored new engineering frontiers. He experimented with electric vehicle conversions, custom builds, and mechanical innovations that reflected his curiosity more than commercial viability. He appeared at events, wrote books, gave talks, and connected directly with fans who respected him for choosing integrity over comfort. Unlike the polished world of television, YouTube allowed viewers to see Edd unfiltered, gentle, meticulous, principled, and sometimes stubbornly dedicated to doing things the right way, even if it wasn't the easiest way. Despite the challenges, Edd embraced this chapter with quiet determination. He was never interested in chasing fame. He wanted to inspire people to work with their hands, to understand machines, and to take pride in craftsmanship. Yet for all the fulfillment his new path brought, one shadow lingered: the unresolved tension between him and the show that had made him a household name. And while Edd focused on building his future from scratch, Wheeler Dealers was undergoing a transformation of its own, one that would change the show's identity forever. While Edd forged his independent path, Wheeler Dealers faced a monumental challenge. How do you replace someone who seemed irreplaceable? The answer arrived in the form of Ant Anstead, a skilled mechanic with charisma, knowledge, and a naturally warm, on-screen presence. Bringing Ant into the workshop allowed the show to reset its tone without abandoning its roots. The chemistry between Mike and Ant wasn't a copy of the original duo. It was something new, something more aligned with the Americanized format Velocity envisioned. Under Ant's tenure, the show adopted a slightly smoother pace. Repairs were still educational, educational, but with a lighter touch. The dynamic felt less instructional and more conversational. For some fans, this was a refreshing evolution. For others, it was a reminder of what had been lost. The audience split into two camps: those who embraced the new era and those who insisted the show would never match the meticulous expertise Edd provided. Yet the reboot succeeded. Mike and Ant built a loyal following, traveled across the United States, and tackled a variety of projects that expanded the show's cultural footprint. The series seemed to stabilize until another shift arrived. Ant eventually left the show, opening the door for a new mechanic, Mark Elvis Priestley, a former Formula One technician with a sharp skill set and a high-energy personality. Elvis brought a more technical, motorsport-oriented feel to the workshop, giving the show yet another reinvention. Through each transition, Mike remained the constant force, the dealmaker, the storyteller, the bridge connecting past and present. He weathered criticism, embraced new co-hosts, and continued shaping the show with the same enthusiasm he had in 2003. But even as Wheeler Dealers evolved, a question lingered at the heart of the fan base. Could the show ever fully escape the shadow of the split, or would the legacy of the original partnership loom over every new episode? Years after the split, fans still wonder whether Edd China and Mike Brewer harbor resentment toward each other. The truth is more complex and far more human than the dramatic narratives that flooded social media in 2017. Both men have repeatedly emphasized that there is no hatred between them. There is disappointment, yes, distance, definitely, but animosity, not in the way the internet imagined. Mike has said many times that he would welcome Edd back in an instant. His words reflect genuine admiration, not PR polish. Despite everything he endured, the threats, the accusations, the emotional toll, he still speaks of Edd as a brilliant engineer and a transformative force in automobile television. That kind of respect doesn't vanish easily. Edd, on the other hand, has been consistently diplomatic. He avoids controversy, chooses his words carefully, and focuses on his work rather than revisiting the fracture. He has never publicly attacked Mike, even when given the opportunity. Instead, he frames their separation as a creative divergence, two professionals whose paths simply no longer align. Still, it's hard to ignore the sense that Edd was deeply wounded by the corporate pressures surrounding the show, pressures that inevitably placed a strain on relationships behind the scenes. Their lives have taken dramatically different routes. Mike remains the face of Wheeler Dealers, traveling, filming, and carrying the weight of a global franchise. Edd has become a symbol of engineering integrity, carving out a slower, more deliberate legacy built on passion rather than production cycle, and yet they remain permanently connected in the eyes of millions. Will they ever reunite? Realistically, the chance is slim. The industry has changed, the show has evolved, and both men have found new identities. But emotionally, for viewers, the door remains open. Their partnership defined an era. Their split reshaped the show, and their story, full of respect, disagreement, admiration, and misunderstanding, stands as one of the most compelling narratives in automotive television. Even if they never share a workshop again, Edd China and Mike Brewer will always share something far more enduring: the legacy of a show that changed automotive storytelling forever.